All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here with us today on this beautiful evening here, at least for me in Southern California. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's nice. But anyways, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation that we're going to have. But before we get started, we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. So although we are meeting virtually, are meeting virtually from California, which is home to many First Nations, and it is our responsibility to acknowledge that we are on their stolen land, and that it is important that we make these, when we make these land acknowledgements, that we don't make them just in the past, but understanding that they are with us currently in the present and will be with us in the future, and to further explore measures like land back, because a land acknowledgement is only just a land acknowledgement. But yes, thank you so much. And if you haven't or you don't know what land you currently reside on, you can visit Native Lands. I'll find the link real quick, and then I'll drop it in the chat for you all so you can access that resource. But thank you, and I'll pass it back over to Haley.
Yes, thank you everyone. My name's Haley. I am the current president of Student CTA, and that was Jonathan, who is our vice president. So thank you for being here, and I will pass it on to our panelists. So I'll just popcorn it to Miyuki. Introduce yourself, say hello.
Hello everyone, my name is Miyuki Montanedo. I am a second grade teacher teaching at a Spanish-English two-way bilingual immersion school, and I'm a member of Davis Teachers Association. I'll popcorn it to Erin.
Thank you, Miyuki. My name is Erin Githens. I use she, her pronouns. I teach fifth grade in South LA. I was like, I don't want to say school. South LA, and I'm a member of the United Teachers Los Angeles. So I'll popcorn it to Irene.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Irene Amesqua. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I teach at Escondido High School in North County, San Diego, and I am a special education teacher. I teach a Mod Severe special day class, so all of my students are earning a certificate of completion of high school.
Awesome. And thank you all for introducing yourselves. And I guess it's so great to be in a space with you all, because I know some of y'all mentioned special education. I want to do special education, and then other routes that I know Haley might be interested in. But so exciting. But I think we can just kick off with our kind of conversation today about our first year of teaching in a year like no other, but not our first year of teaching, you all's, our panelists' first year of teaching. And we're so excited to learn from you all in this time that we have with you today, and also hope that other folks are able to learn a little bit more as well. So as I transition over here, I'm going to ask one question. And this question is always kind of like, I need to get an answer for this, just because I'm still in my undergrad, but I'm already thinking about my classroom. So my question to you is, how did you decide how to decorate your classroom, and like, what's your process, or what inspired you to decorate your classroom? And then anybody can go for it. I'm not going to choose names, and then y'all are going to popcorn it, because I know you all are so, like, close together. So go for it.
I think I can start us off. I teach lower elementary, so my parents are both educators, and they both weren't very big on decorating their classrooms. So I find that I'm not very big on decorating my classroom, just because I realize that it can be an extra expense I might feel inclined to make. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to make those out-of-pocket expenses. But what I find that I have in my classroom, and since I'm in my classroom right now, I can put my camera around. I have a lot of student work on the walls, art that they've put together. I teach in a class at a school site that the Sobrato Early Academic Language Model. So there's a lot of chants that we do. We have a lot of anchor charts. So I find that the anchor charts and the chants, they're really what decorate my classroom. And so it's like academic teacher decor. That's what I try convincing myself. I'm not sure. I know, Erin, I know you have some pretty cool things in your classroom.
You're making me feel bad, Miyuki, that I like booked it home and I'm not in my classroom. Yeah, I don't know. I think for me, I didn't really think about how I was going to decorate it till I like saw the space. And like my classroom is like really old. So it's like the school's almost 100 and like they say my floor is haunted, so I had to go with like that kind of vibe. And so um it's really long. So I was kind of just like asking around because there wasn't a lot of furniture in the space. So I asked like my friends, like, if you can give me anything. And one of my friends, who's in landscape, who's not a teacher, she gave me like patches of grass because she just had a bunch of astroturf flying around. And I was like, what am I going to do with this? She's like, make it a rug. I was like, okay. So I have like astroturf kind of like in my class everywhere, but that's one of the main library rugs in my space, which is really cool because I really like a lot of nature and it kind of makes the space very calming. And then also from like CTA, I had this one wall that like nothing really sticks to it anchor chart wise, but I did have a lot of California Reads things that I got from CTA events. So I put those posters and that's kind of like an accent wall, if you will. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. Irene, you can be the next.
So my classroom is pretty small. The building's pretty old as well. I do have students that are triggered by either bright lights, bright colors, too much on the walls. So I try to keep it pretty simple. I have a couple posters, some money skills. My classroom's also a life. We also follow like it's functional, so life skills, functional ELA, math, science, social science. So I have some posters about basic job skills, and then I have some basic class rules. I have both like visuals on there and the words as well, because I do have some students reading as high as a fourth grade level, and then I have some students that are still learning their letter sounds. I also have a couple like very beautiful calming paintings, like dark colors that the teacher before me left, which I thought was great. And of course, I do have our calendar because some of my students are still learning days of the week and numbers. And I do have my number line and my my alphabet chart too. And I also have a daily schedule as well with the times because I do have students that are still learning how to tell time. And I have tables in my classroom instead of desk, and I really like it, and I think they do too. And it's a little easier to clean, and it's nice to lift the chairs because I do have students that vacuum. And well, when we get a new vacuum, because ours is broken right now.
Thank you for that. And I also want to reiterate, like Jonathan said, like even though I'm here asking, helping with questions, I'm super excited for the rest of this day. So next question we have is, how did you take your in-person student teaching experience and apply it to your distance learning experience?
I can start this time, or we can just keep peer pressuring Miyuki to go first. But I I think for me, because I was in two different placements, so I like saw two different rooms, and I did leave both assignments like feeling very comfortable and like I felt I learned a lot from their procedures and routines, but I also saw firsthand like if you don't really build like kind of relationships with students, it doesn't really matter what your procedures and routines are. So for me, that was like such a priority to really just get to know the students. So I felt like during distance learning, I pulled from like every hat of every single game to make my SEL time like part of my main prep, just so that the students would be engaged and like want to come.
So I did my gen ed student teaching about 3 years ago, so prior to the pandemic. And I was in a combo class, fourth and fifth grade, so that was a very different experience, and it was a great experience too because just like what Erin said too, I think I was also focusing on like building relationships with the students and the families, and I just happened to student teacher at my neighborhood school. And my or my crop writing teacher, he and I got along really well. And so I think that dynamic really um, related a lot to how we were teaching and how we were trying to connect with students as well. Like you could feel that dynamic in the classroom, which I think was great. For special ed, I did like an internship last year, so where you're paid like some districts have a different salary schedule for interns and some pay the first year teacher salary, so it just depends on your district. So I was lucky enough to do that for my mile mod instead of student teach, and that was the beginning of it was distance learning for like the first month or so, and then after that we did like special ed cohorts. And that was very difficult because our schedule kept on changing, and I had students come in person for a little bit, and then I would see them online later. And then eventually we all made our way back to the classroom by like the end of April. So that was and it was elementary. So it was a lot on them, just them relearning social skills and just being really patient with them, especially you can tell the ones that were logging on to Zoom and the ones that weren't. So we were just doing our best to work with them. And then this year, of course, yes, we're still in the pandemic, but I am in-person learning. But I do have 2 students on my caseload that are independent study, and they have their own teacher at another school in the same district. So I try to collaborate with her as much as possible, just to connect with those families too. So I try to connect with my families as much as possible.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I love all of that stuff. And Miyuki, I know you had some words too to share.
Yeah, my student teaching year was I student taught 2019, 2020. So the school buildings all had to had to close when I was doing my student teaching. So I only really had from what was it, August, end of August to what was it, March 13th, that Friday. That was about it for me when it came to actual in-person being able to practice teaching with my resident teacher. The rest of it was distance learning or the crisis response distance learning that a lot of us experienced. So it was a lot of what did I see when I volunteered in other places before I joined my credential program, and also things I had seen my parents do, even though they weren't my resident teachers or anything like that. So, but what I did pick up from it was establishing the routines and the high expectations that you could still do that even through distance learning. It just looked different, and it took a little bit of thinking for me to realize, okay, what can these kids do, like despite their age on a computer? And once I kind of figured it out and set that, like I think things started going a little smoother than how they did at the beginning of the school year.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know we just talked a lot about like the kiddos and adjusting to the kiddos, but what I kind of have a curious question is how you all adjusted with your educators, like your kind of your groups, so to say, when it came to the transition, or like your teacher mentor. I personally had an internship right when the pandemic was about to start, and that's actually how I met Haley. And now where I'm in student CTA, so go that internship, right? Turn up. But she, my teacher, she was a little interesting when it came to the transition because of how crazy everything was. So where I went from learning, I went to more supporting role. But I'm wondering in your kind of like first years teaching, and then teaching through a pandemic, like how was that? Did you find educator support within your sites, or was it a little difficult, or was it easy? Let us know.
I can start this one again. And I think I mentioned this in like the little article as well. Like I at my school site, I'm only going to speak about my school site because that's where I did most of my interactions with, I felt so supported. My grade level colleagues, like I think I might be like the luckiest, I must have been the luckiest new teacher in existence, because not only would I have felt supported with them with a potential in-person first year of teaching, like I kind of feel like I'm doing right now, but like I felt very supported, and it felt like a very even playing field within my grade level with my 2 grade level colleagues, because I didn't feel like my hand was being held through everything. I felt like we were all kind of holding hands, like kind of treading water to make sure we all were like keeping ourselves like sustained, both academically, when it came to planning, when it came to execution, and also when it came like social emotionally too. Like we really checked in on each other, and we made sure that we were all doing the best we possibly could be doing in those moments. And then to make things even better in my situation, at my site we have 2, well, one's a reading specialist, the other, she's the librarian. They both provided support to us for new hires that year, where they were, it became like almost like a support group, to put it just like in simplest terms, where it was a place where we could ask questions in a safe space. We would learn how to navigate the school site, the school district, ask questions, and also just kind of vent. That was also kind of an important element of it too, to feel like we could be heard and not judged at the same time. And I think with that, it made me feel very grateful to be at my school site. And I have a lot of other friends who did the credential program with me, and I hear how they were at their site, and I realized that I really had it very good in compared to others. It wasn't easy. Didn't mean that last year was an easy year, but having that support made a world of a difference.
I wasn't sure if there's a delay. I'm sorry. Okay, I can go. I kind of agree with Miyuki. I had a similar situation where I felt supported at my site, and actually I had like the same metaphor in my head of like we're all kind of struggling to tread water, and there was a lot of people on the team who were very much like, here, you need to take your time and like catch up here. Let me help you. What can I bring? And I really felt like my school was a good spot of like, this is what you're good at, and this is what I'm good at, so this is how I'm going to participate in this space. So like even just like when you're a teacher, your only job isn't to just teach. Like you're on like 8.5 million committees for your school. Like there's all these adjunct duties, and so like at my school it was very much like, here, let me help you with this. Like I feel like I'm really good digitally organized, and I know that was a lot of like my more veteran colleagues like weaker skill that year. And so I would just try to make it super simple, and like I'd volunteer to type when I could, even though I'm like, I don't want to type all the time, but I felt like that was my way to contribute. And I also felt very supportive by being SCTA alum. I have met a lot of educators up and down the state who are not in the same situation, but like in the same pandemic, where it's very nice to just check in with people up and down the state and like talk about our commonalities and give each other hope. And like there are people that are here to remind me of my values and like why I'm here, to it keeps me in it. So all right, I'll pass to Irene.
Unfortunately, my first year teaching, I did not really get much support, or the support that I wish I could have received. And I was also an intern for special ed for Milemont. I was a resource specialist, so I ended the year with 25 students on my caseload, and I was the only resource specialist for kinder through 5th grade. So I had a pretty wide range of students working with. My students though were amazing. I didn't really have any much behaviors, and I think they were the ones that kept me motivated during the year. In our special ed department, a lot of the support providers were great, and I think they were the ones that kept me motivated too, like our instructional aides and our OT and speech and language pathologists. They were really sweet and were, I think, doing their best to help me when they could. My special ed director, it was not the best experience. It was also her first year in that position, so I could understand where she was coming from, but unfortunately, not only was she didn't really know like how to talk to me or how to treat me. She was treating me like a student or a child more than like a colleague or an adult. So that was pretty hard and frustrating. And some of the other general education teachers too were having a difficult time following the IEP. And as you all know, you have to follow the IEP. It's not an option. Otherwise, that can bite back to haunt the district, going through due process, getting sued by the parents, like who knows what could happen and go from there. And so that was really rough. And then some of the families too, I did work with some pretty amazing families, but I did have some families that were not really treating me like a professional. I had some families that even refused to say my name, and that was a pretty that was very triggering, at least for me. That was tough. Even some general education teachers were also the same way too, and it was a very tough experience. But I was able to survive and make my way through the first year. I was able to talk to some other CTA colleagues around the state, and then my colleagues in my credential program too, because there were quite a few of us that were interns. So it was nice to kind of have that neutral voice and really just fall back on them and vent on them when I needed something. So I think that was an interesting experience. I learned a lot about myself.
Thank you for that. Now, we're interested in your first year of teaching. How did you approach social and racial justice in the classroom?
I don't think I've gone first yet, so I'll let Miyuki off this one time. I guess for me, your first year, you feel like you have to do everything, and like it is like a Herculean task where you have so much to learn, and even though you go in like prepared to some capacity, there are things you want to do. And for me, teaching is a political choice, and so I had to figure out how I was going to make it a priority while still doing my quote unquote job. And so I think it was kind of easier once I knew like I'm legally required to teach the standards, not necessarily the curriculum. And so kind of giving myself that like academic freedom, so to say, to bring in texts like that demonstrate representation, that are actually like culturally relevant, mean something to the communities I'm serving. Because otherwise, last year during like ELA, there's like a whole unit that's really popular for elementary that's like, they have 3 weeks on corn. Like our climate's falling apart and they want me to spend 3 weeks on corn. Like, no. So I think like, I felt, so if like an administrator comes in, I am teaching to the standards and I'm giving a rigorous platform, but it was kind of using my like professional judgment there to know I know my rights and I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And so Welcoming Schools is a great resource if you want to some LGBTQ representation. Black Lives Matter week at school is not something you have to just do that week. You can do it all year. And so for me, those were my two main like resources that I was able to pull from.
I'll go next. So for me, last year I was a resource specialist. So I was doing mainly push in and pull out. So I did a lot of especially reading intervention, I think. And I was also supporting my students in the gen ed classrooms, mainly for reading, writing, and math. And so, unfortunately, with the demographic I was in last year, I taught a lot of the community is a little bit more upper, middle, higher class, and the demographics too. Last year was really tough. There were even a lot of like anti-vaxxers in the community, a lot of like families that identify like as Republican or have other more like conservative beliefs. So even the gen ed teachers at my school that had been teaching there for years, I think they found it a little bit tough too, like trying to like trying to teach based on using the social racial justice like curriculum and some of the resources we have out there. And I had to be careful too because I'm still probationary, but I know I did give my students like the space to talk, especially after the election, because that happened, right in, November 2020. And we were already back in pods, like in person. So I did see, especially some of my fifth graders that really have an idea of what's going on around the world. Like they're aware of, the things that are going on. So I just really gave them the space to talk and to just vent. And they like to ask me questions about what was going on in the world. And honestly, we just did some research together. We looked at different news outlets that had, both sides of the story. And we just took that time just so that they could learn and look at both sides, especially when they were doing some of their opinion writing and they were looking at both sides of a story. I tried to take a little bit more advantage of that opportunity and some of the people that they were studying and really showing them both sides of history. So I think that was the best that I could do in those circumstances. Now that I'm in high school, my school's a little bit more, I have a little bit more freedom to teach a little bit of some of the racial and social justice topics. Our principal, our admin, he's full on for like Black Lives Matter. They're trying to provide us with some resources throughout the year. We have a bunch of, so it's a little bit more, so I like the environment I'm in right now, a little bit more welcoming.
Then in my case, we, part of teaching using SEAL's model is we have thematic units that integrate language arts with social studies. And in that sense, sorry. And so there was actually time built into it's built into the curriculum of our first thematic unit to talk about, at least in this past year, was to talk about Black Lives Matter, to talk about climate change, to talk about different topics that, one of the core focus of that unit was being an ally. So we started off by reading the book Intersection Allies. And granted, I think one very nerve-wracking thing about being a first-year teacher last year was the families were watching you because we were on Zoom, and so everything I say, they can hear, if the parents are in the room, if somebody else is in the room, whatever. So, I still taught them the way I would have had I been in person, but it was like it created an extra stress that even though I knew what I was teaching and how I was presenting the content wasn't problematic, and I knew that stuff like what Erin said, these topics need to be taught and looking at the standards and this and that. But it was always the hinge of fear, like what if a parent doesn't like this and then goes and complains? But because it was these conversations to happen, which really felt very reassuring to me because it also reaffirmed like, okay, I'm at the right place right now. I'm at the right school. And when we had our parent teacher conferences later on in November, they kept on asking me, are you still going to be having these conversations about social justice topics? We love how our child, at dinner is sharing with us that you taught them about this or you taught them about that, which was also really very reassuring because, okay, it's working. Like embedding these things into my lessons, they're working, and the little spin that I'm giving to them, so that way they have a little bit more than what the unit is having us talk about. It's making an impact, and the students are really taking it outside of the classroom as well.
So we know as educators and as aspiring educators that we have the responsibility to implement social and racial justice work within our lessons or whatever it might be. But where did you learn how to teach about social and racial justice? Was it your teacher prep programs? And then a follow-up to that question, then I know is that like Irene, you talked about not having a necessarily like a safe space. But what gave you the courage then to do that social and racial justice work? And did student CTA or CTA have anything to do with it?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the resources that I learned, especially in that realm, I definitely did not learn in my credential program. And when I was student teaching for gen ed, my cooperating teacher, is as nice of a person he was and as great of a teacher he was, never really, you know, really provided students with those resources or didn't really teach to or provide that curriculum, unfortunately. So I learned a lot of it through CTA, through a few student CTA events, and of course through other colleagues at my school, especially this year because I'm in a new district, new school, and of course different grade level high school. So my district now has a lot more resources, and they've been more open to what we are able to teach the students. And so last year, given the demographics I was in and the district I was in, I think what encouraged me more to give my students that space was just because I feel like I owed it to them, especially given, we were still in a, we're still in a pandemic, but even last year, it was a bit crazier since none of us were vaccinated around the time of the election. And they seemed so just eager to know what was going on in the world. And they were just so, like, you could see like their brains are sponges. Like they were just so eager to learn and to get out and to really get an idea of what was going on. And it was clear that they weren't getting that at home. So I just did my best just to give them that space to research, to learn a little more about themselves and the world, and to even have those conversations with them. I was really just more of the facilitator for some of that, especially my fifth graders, because I had quite a few fifth graders that were boys and then a couple girls too, but especially the boys, they were very eager to really learn a little more about like even their privilege too. Like a couple of them like brought that up, and I brought it up too. Just because they were talking about it too, and even they brought up a couple times talking about that the police are going to treat them a little different than some of their other classmates. And it was quite obvious because of the color of their skin. And I did appreciate them bringing them up because I know that they could not have those conversations at home. So I tried my best to give them, as much space as I could to have those conversations.
I was like, okay, I'll pull rank, Miyuki. I'm 3 days older. Okay, so I would say I don't think my credential program was bad. I just don't feel like it was very preparing for racial and social justice. Like, definitely didn't hurt me my time there. But I think, being a member of SCTA, which is the Student California Teachers Association, was like an opportunity that you really just don't get through anything else. Because I think when you see racial and social justice, at least how I saw it, is like people are doing such amazing work, and that their schools are these magical places where like, nothing bad could happen because they figured it out. And so like when I read Rethinking Schools, and there's amazing strategies, amazing resources, please read it. But I thought their schools were like figured it out, and like they don't need to keep it going. But kind of being an SCTA member and like meeting people who are starting in the profession who are doing racial and social justice work, and then for them to tell me to say they still get pushback from admin, or they feel like they don't have enough resources, they feel like they're conflicted between doing their job and like they might not be doing enough. It appears like it's not as rigorous. And so it's really nice to be affirmed by a colleague, especially a colleague you respect. And like, so when I kind of like give like Miyuki and Irene like a call, and I tell them like what I'm doing, and I'm like, oh, I just don't feel like I'm doing enough. And they'll be like, no, you're doing a lot for these kids, more than you think. Like, we're in a pandemic, and they'll remind me like, so what if you had to spend 10 extra minutes on SEL? Like, your kids are going through a lot. So kind of like those people remember like the humane component of the job. And not to take up too much more time, but being an anti-racist person should be like the first thing you do. And like, I don't know if I'm there yet myself, but it's something I'm committed to. And now I don't see like how to be anti-racist educators like a separate thing. It's more of like teaching is my kind of platform, and like it's a power I hold. And so what do I want to, like, at first it kind of just felt like I was doing harm reduction of like, what am I not going to cause harm with? Like, as opposed to now I'm going to be implementing like ethnic studies or like being a part of a community school model. So I think it's an ongoing process. There's not a checklist, but find your people that are doing it so they can affirm you is very important.
Without spending too much extra time either, like pretty much what Erin said is kind of summarizes what I would have said myself. I know Erin's one of those people that I look up to when it comes to racial and social justice work in general. So whenever I need advice on how to address something with my students or just like have a conversation with another adult, I definitely am like, Ms. G, are you free for 10 minutes? And then we talk for 2 hours. And then we don't get what we should be getting done completed. But I mean, SCTA was absolutely instrumental in me being able to have these conversations with my students, because without SCTA in my life, I maybe wouldn't have found a place for me to be able to learn about how to engage in these topics. Because I think it definitely is, there is a skill set involved when it comes to having conversations around racial and social justice. And I know Student CTA has been, at least when I was an active member, was pretty phenomenal when it came to providing us with the tools we needed to be able to engage in the conversations, but also to take a step back and reflect on our own privilege and ways that we might perpetuate, systemic racism and institutional racism as well.
Thank you, everyone. So now I just kind of want to get into what surprised you the most. Of course, this is, again, a year like no other. Probably would have been a lot different if it was not in a pandemic. But what surprised you the most? And so far with this experience, what advice would you give to us, to aspiring educators?
I can go. Irene moved her mouse and I was like, she's unmuting. I'm not going to volunteer you. I think for me, what was kind of surprising was to see what like everybody's priorities were, I guess. Like, because we all understood that we couldn't do everything. And so what people felt like we should be doing first and at what like quality was very interesting to see. And I think a lot of people had to have a conversation with themselves or like their groups of like, what is going to be sustainable? Because I think everyone's definition kind of shifted. And so I know for me, I had to have a conversation with myself of like, how am I going to be an educator, be an activist and do any of this if I'm like tired, like not teacher tired, like I'm working under disaster capitalism tired, like, and so for me, I had to figure that out. So, that was kind of surprising. As an aspiring educator, I know it's horrible right now, like of what perhaps the media is showing, and having the privilege of like being in a part of SCTA, knowing so many educators, like people are leaving, and I feel like I'm on a sinking ship. And it's more, I keep telling like people, like I've said it a lot, like affirm your people, because it like breaks my heart to see people leave, but we're gonna get through this together, because if like we don't care, like who will? And we know best. And I consider aspiring educators like the people that know it, because like they say you're not an educator, but like Jonathan said he's in the classroom in some capacity. I know Haley's working in education. Like you're working with the educators, like you're in it, like we already know, and let's make sure we stay and like make sure the boat floats.
I think the advice I'd give to aspiring educators right now is to don't fall, at least I like to think of it, don't fall prey to the toxic positivity that you can see amongst like the teacher influencers. Reason being, if I think about the amount of energy I might put into making sure my classroom looks the way an influencer's classroom might look like, and the amount of I don't want aspiring educators to think that they're not a good educator if their classrooms don't look like that. I don't want aspiring educators to think that they're not going to be a good teacher if they're not, writing a handwritten note to their, all 27 of their students at the end of every week. A lot of these things are not realistic to do on such a frequent basis. And it's okay to not do those things. And that being said, it's okay to take a moment for yourself. I remember at the beginning of last school year, I was, working, well, the line between home and school was very blurred because I was sometimes teaching from home. And so all of a sudden my dining table was my desk. And so as I'd be waiting for my husband to get back from his classroom, because we shared a studio apartment, I would still be working. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm working through my lunch hour. Like, why am I doing this? It's okay to like set a deadline for you to stop working. The work will get done. Learn to prioritize what you think is the most important task. So if the difference is beautifying your classroom versus figuring out what are the main, like what your math lesson needs to be prepped, what you need to prep for your math lesson to be successful, do the math lesson stuff. The rest of the classroom stuff can happen later when you have the time or when you have the headspace. And it's also okay to not, like, I guess just don't compare yourself to other teachers, because there are some teachers who've been teaching longer and have more resources that they've collected over the years. Because I inherited an empty classroom, minimal storage, or hardly any books were left in my library when I inherited it. So does that mean that when I see influencers, show their, thank you for all these donations for all these books for my classroom, like I don't have the time to ask for donations for my classroom library. Doesn't mean I don't care about my students. No. So just try not to, it's hard, it's easier said than done, but please try not to compare yourself and know you're doing the best you possibly can for the situation and circumstances that you're in, as well as the resources that your school can provide for you. And take it at the beginning, take it day by day, and you'll find that take it week by week, and eventually it's gonna be like, okay, I know what I'm doing. But it'll come on your schedule and your timeline, and don't expect others to, if it worked for somebody else, don't expect it to work for you, and vice versa.
Thank you. Irene, I'm going to interject real quick and just say, I really love your advice, Miyuki, and I want to uplift that advice as well to current educators, because y'all do so great and do amazing things. But yeah, Miyuki's out here preaching facts to aspiring educators and current educators alike. But take it away, Irene.
Yeah, I would definitely say take care of yourself and set boundaries. Especially last year, I had like 4 annuals in 2 days. I've had like triennials for IEPs like back to back. And those days, like I did my best to like get a good night's sleep. I try to exercise almost every day, like just setting those boundaries for like me time and work time. And I agree too, like just, yeah, don't compare yourself to others. Even, especially this year, I have some really awesome colleagues. Our Mod Severe SPED department has some really amazing teachers with great experience, but we all have our like, different teaching styles, and our classrooms are completely different because we have our autism programs, and then my program and another teacher's program, which is Bridge. So our students are going for certificate of completion. So they're a little bit higher, but not high enough to get a high school diploma. And then we have our medically fragile classroom, but we all still like collaborate and share resources with one another. Like I did a money unit today, and I borrowed stuff from another teacher, like all the fake money and whatnot, instead of like, going to buy my own and whatnot. So just definitely utilizing what's around you is super important. And like I said, setting those boundaries, even on weekends too. Like I'll admit I still do work on weekends, but I don't do like as crazy as, some of my weekdays or weeknights. I try to just either just check emails, or if I know I'm going to be gone one day that week or a period when I'm, doing an IEP, I'll just set up like lesson plans or whatnot. But I do my best not to like work too crazy on weekends, and sometimes that works a little more than others. And I am going for my master's right now, so I'm trying to focus that a little more on weekends, instead of that kind of has disciplined me a little to focus more on that on weekends instead of, my classroom. So yeah, just, I mean, just, taking care of yourself and just, relying on others for help. But then at the end, like, you're the teacher, you're the one that knows your students the best. So just also trusting yourself and taking risks. Like, I think that's good to take risks, like on a lesson or on a book or on some manipulatives you think might benefit the student. Like, take that risk, even if it doesn't work out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your insight. I have one more question in mind that I would like to ask, but I also would like to give the opportunity for those attendees with us to ask any questions that they might have to our panelists before I ask this question, just to make sure we give enough time for your question. And then feel free to just type it in the chat. And I'll wait another minute because I know some questions can take a long time to type out.
Get him a classroom. He knows wait time.
Yeah, exactly. You got to give it some time. My favorite professors are not those that just rush through everything on Zoom. But since I don't see any questions, I'm going to go ahead and we talked a lot about like tips for aspiring educators and just kind of like your transition over the support systems that you saw. But a question that I've had and I've had student CTA members ask me is, how do I transition from student CTA to CTA, and how does CTA, or how can CTA support me in my first year of teaching? So if there are any things that you would like to just promote out there, this is a good place.
I felt very. Oh, did you want to go?
No, I was actually going to say Aaron should take this one first because you jumped you did a very great job at jumping straight from SCTA directly into an active member CTA.
Yeah, I think I was very privileged to know. Like I said, CTA is not your necessarily. It's a network in a way. I would think of it as like you're building relationships. Like these are your community, your people. Like, and so I was really privileged to know my local president like right off the bat, and so I was very and my CTA board member. So I remember when I was applying to my district, I was texting my CTA board member like just general, questions about the hiring process, and she actually got a person who worked at HR to come talk to me and just like kind of give me some advice, which was like so awesome. And then when I got hired and I had to go in to sign my district contract, my union president called me and she said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm signing my contract." She's like, "Perfect. Let's sign your union card next." And so I was at a union meeting like that night. And like, so shout out to Erica Jones and Cecily Meyer Cruz for, not just being like, "Oh, we know Aaron, glad you're here," but like, actually taking the time to call me and check on me and like invite me in, because they don't have to do that. And if I would get involved in union work, don't necessarily do it at your site the first 2 years, because you're on probation, but you can still be involved in other ways. So I'll let Irene and Miyuki say that.
Yeah, so last year was my first year, and there was a special election for a state council rep. So I was already on CTA elections and credentials committee. I was on there as a student CTA member, and then I was going to be on there as a CTA member. Actually, I was very briefly, and then we had a special election for a state council seat. There were like 2 vacant delegate positions, and they just happened to be in my area, in my municipal district area. And so I noticed that people weren't running, and so I decided just to put my name in the hat, just because I just I mean, just being involved already, and I was a state council delegate for 2 years as a student CTA member. So I was familiar with the process already, and just it was heartbreaking when you have two vacant seats, and that's two less voices, especially in your area. So that's why I decided to run. And not only that, I was also trying to help as much as possible to get that other seat filled, even if there was competition, because I was hoping it did. And thankfully, by the end of last year, we had both seats filled. And it just so happened that my new district, I'm in that same area still, so I was able to keep my seat. So I'm a state council delegate, and I'm on the student support services subcommittee, and I just got elected as their reporter. So that's pretty exciting. But just a little bit like what Erin said about getting involved in your local. When I attended our first luncheon for us new teachers in our local, our local, our officer, our e-board is pretty awesome. And they were even telling us too, probably not run as a site rep until, your permanent status or you've, gone through induction. But they said that we could still get involved in some of their little subcommittees, whether that's taking care of their website, maybe helping with some minutes from a local meeting, from our site meetings, or helping with things on social media, on their social media accounts, just those other little subcommittees. So it was nice to get some advice from them about what we could do and get involved, even if we haven't reached permanent status yet. So I did appreciate that from my local, and my local president is literally just down the hallway. She's at my site. So it's nice to see that familiar face, and she's pretty awesome. She just said I can go by her classroom anytime, or if there's anything going on, to let her know. And that she would never what's nice about our sped department is everyone else there is permanent status. I'm the only one that's not, but they ever said if there was an issue that I needed to bring up with our local, that they would speak on my behalf. They would say, for example, this is an issue in the sped department, instead of oh, this is just an issue that one teacher's having. So I did appreciate that too.
I'm so sad that I haven't been as involved as I used to be. And honestly, in my situation, the opportunity just hasn't really arisen. There haven't been very many opportunities for me to get involved in my local. Just recently, I found out that my site is looking for a second site rep, and when they announced it at the meeting, 4 or 5 people just started staring directly at me, which was very, which was flattering that people looked at me, because they were like, "Okay, Miyuki," but I did tell them, if you want to find someone who wants to do it this year, and I'll do it next year, right? So I just want to make sure I'm not probationary status anymore before I get more involved on that level. But I am on CTA's Racial and Social Justice Advisory Committee, and I'm also this year's SCTA past officer. So SCTA drew me back in one more time. So that has made me feel very fulfilled. Even though this past weekend was just my first meeting in that capacity, it feels still very nice to be active again in some way, shape, or form. Because I really love the work, and I really miss doing the work. I don't necessarily miss having to fly out so often to do the work, but I know that it won't be like that as a C team, and we're getting active, getting back into the game.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you with us, Miyuki. And then with that in mind, Erin and Irene, you've been in spaces with us before and have always been resources for us. So we appreciate all the things that you share with us, including all the words of wisdom tonight.
Well, one of my questions, or just a good question that I'll probably, in spaces with educators that I'll meet who did teach in the pandemic, it's what is something that you learned during the pandemic that you're going to take forward in the rest of your career, if there is anything?
I can answer this in very quickly. Breaks. We want breaks as educators, but I don't know why it was never common practice to give students breaks as well, as if they don't need breaks. I mean, they're little humans at the end of the day. Like, so what I've been trying to do is the same way that I give my students Zoom breaks during my instruction, I also try embedding breaks into my like in-person instruction, whether that's giving them a coloring sheet, giving them a hidden pictures. They really love this right now, or telling them like, you know, with social distancing, like not where they're in each other's faces or anything, right? I'll tell them on the carpet, okay, I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to you can move around the carpet, talk to someone about whatever you want. Maybe there's something that happened at recess, you want to talk to them about it, or one thing or another. And I'll usually give them about 5-minute breaks, like here scattered here and there throughout the day. And I feel like it's working. Like it gives them the headspace. I mean, we're working on the transitions on how to get back from a little mini 5-minute break, but I feel like that'll always stick with me. And I think that my experience having had to teach last year will always be unfortunately, it'll come down to this, but it'll always be a valid justification. You know, it's like a badge of honor that we all had. Like we taught during the pandemic. So yeah, that's one thing that I know will stick with me amongst many things, right?
Wait, go ahead, Erin.
Oh, okay. I think for me, just not being like too hard on myself, trying to be patient, with myself and others. And I think, just at the end of the day, you know, our students, you know, they're kids, teenagers, you know, young adults, you know, they've got their own lives, they're growing up, they've got a lot of, you know, things going on outside of the classroom. And so it's nice to just remind yourself and have those reminders about, you know, for some of these students to just show up to school is like a really big deal. For my students in particular, since I do have a special day class, we do like hygiene checks. I've got like toothbrushes, toothpaste, I've got deodorant. We're setting up a shower in one of our other classrooms for those students that just need it, just to get ready for the day. I've got hairbrushes. Another part of that hygiene check is just checking if our students had breakfast in the morning. What I've noticed is a little different at high school, or at least in my district, is they don't get nutrition. Well, it's called nutrition instead of recess. And they don't get that some days until like 10 o'clock. And we start the day at 8:30. And that's like a long time from like the moment they get up to then, like without like any food. So that's one of the things we do, like first thing in the morning is we've got stuff in the fridge. We've got like, you know, granola bars. They know they can go get water we have water cups to go to the water filter in the fountain. And just like those little reminders too. I'm sure that was really hard during the pandemic. I couldn't imagine some of those students, what they were going through. I know some of the schools did offer, or a lot of them offered, you know, the free reduced lunch. But, you know, a lot of times it's not the same, you know, right, as coming, you know, and having a schedule of when to eat and whatnot. So I think that's something I'll take out of the pandemic.
I'll be brief. I think it would just be, they can't say this is the way we've always done it anymore, because things can change if people pay attention. So I'll keep that as a moment of hope, even though education and pivot, we can. So, and like that.
Thank you for ending off on such inspiring words, Erin, because time and time again, we are reminded as student CTA members that we're here to change things up. And you three are all perfect examples of how this student program brought to fruition 3 leaders who are really stirring things up in CTA and working towards the greater good of public education. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and thank you to all the attendees for making the time as well out of your busy schedules. And I hope everyone has a wonderful night. And to you 3 educators with us on the panel, again, thank you, get rest and teach on. We can't wait to be with you all in this space again.